Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Herman Dunbar.
Hold on 1 second, for some reason it's not accepting.
Herman Dunbar. All right, I'll come back. Carl Hacker. Carl Hacker.
He's waving.
Okay. I'll come back. Thomas Newton. Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Roger Rolifson.
He's absent.
Oh, thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
And I'll just go back up for Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank
Did
you,
that
sir.
work? Okay.
Yes. And Herman Dunbar. Is he here? Okay, he's not here, Sarah.
Okay. Thank you. Motion passes. Next, we will go to vote of the approval of the minutes from January the 11th of 2022. Any changes to the minutes? If not, be seeking a motion for approval.
So moved,
I'll make a
Sarah.
motion.
If you could just say your name.
Missy Clark, I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Have a
Yes.
motion by Missy Clark. Entertain a second.
I will second Jim Rice.
We have a motion and a second for the approval of the meeting minutes from January the 11th. All in favor at the roll call vote, please.
Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman. Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Roger Rolifson. He's absent. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
We will move on to the North Carolina Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan Amendment 2. And we'll receive a presentation on that. And I'll turn that over to division staff. Or Laura, if she has any opening comments.
Thank you, Sarah. I did just want to take a moment to let everyone know who's joining us this evening. We are trying a hybrid meeting this time. This was something that we had tried to figure out if we could do it, and we are just going to go with it and see if it works. We're hoping that this will allow more of the public and certainly people who live farther away to participate more easily. And also today we have 2 listening stations, one in Dare County and one in Wilmington. Those stations have been set up for the public to come and listen to the meeting, and also for people to sign up and come speak at those locations as well. And again, that's just to provide an opportunity for the public to be able to come and speak at these meetings more easily. And so with that, I will hand it over to Charlton, Todd, and Nathaniel, and they will be presenting you with the Estuarine Striped Bass presentation tonight. Thank you.
Who am I logging in on?
We're working on it. It should be up soon.
Okay. Good afternoon, AC members. Tonight we will be presenting you the management contained in Draft Amendment 2 to the North Carolina Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan. For those of you who may not know who we are, I am Nathaniel Hancock, and with me are Charlton Godwin, Todd Mathis, and Joe Facendola. We are biologists for the division and co-leads for the Striped Bass FMP. Also joining us today is staff from the Wildlife Resources Commission. Since Amendment 2 was jointly developed by the Division of Marine Fisheries, DMF, and Wildlife Resources Commission, WRC, staff. I also would like to point out that this presentation will follow along with the decision document in your packet that was sent to you a couple weeks ago. The goal of Amendment 2 is to manage for sustainable harvest. However, if factors out of our control prevent this, alternate strategies will be implemented to provide protection for and access to the resource. The objectives to achieve this goal are maintaining and restoring spawning stock, habitat restoration and enhancement, monitoring, and promoting stewardship of the resource. The Northern Management Unit, circled here, includes the Albemarle Sound Management Area, also known as the ASMA in light gray, which includes the Albemarle, Croatan, Roanoke, and Currituck Sounds and all its tributaries, and the Roanoke River Management Area, also known as the RRMA, in black, which includes the Roanoke River from the mouth up to the dam in Gaston. Sorry, technical difficulties. The striped bass stock in this area is known as the Albemarle Roanoke, or AR stock, and spawning takes place in the Roanoke River near Weldon. This stock is also managed under the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission because of the migratory nature of AR striped bass. The most recent AR striped bass stock assessment was completed and approved for management use in 2020. The assessment indicated that the resource is overfished and is experiencing overfishing. The North Carolina Fisheries Reform Act and Amendment 6 to the ASMFC Interstate FMP for Atlantic striped bass require management measures to be implemented to end overfishing in 1 year and end the overfished status in 10 years. The Southern Management Unit is the Central Southern Management Area, also known as the CSMA, which is in dark gray on the map and includes all waters south of the ASMA. The CSMA has 3 stocks, the Tar Pamlico, Noose, and Cape Fear River stocks. Fish in the Tar Pamlico and Noose rivers mix, but they do not tend to go down to the Cape Fear River, nor do Cape Fear River striped bass tend to move north. Because the CSMA striped bass stocks are non-migratory, meaning that they remain resident in the estuary, these stocks are not included under ASMFC management. The CSMA Estuarine Striped Bass Stocks Report, completed in 2020, is a collection of all data, all management effort, and all major analyses that have been completed for CSMA stocks to serve as an aid in development of Amendment 2. While this report does not yield a stock status, it does indicate that sustainability of Tar Pamlico and Noose River stocks is unlikely at any level of fishing mortality. It also indicates that natural recruitment is the primary limiting factor. The report concludes that without stocking, abundance will decline. In the Cape Fear River, abundance declined even with no possession measures in place. The no possession measures were implemented in the Cape Fear River in 2008 and the Tar Pamlico and Noose Rivers in 2019. The overall goal of the no possession measures is to increase the age structure and abundance of fish in these systems to move towards sustainable stocks. Draft Amendment 2 contains 3 sustainable harvest issue papers, 1 issue paper that deals with the potential to use hook and line in the striped bass commercial fishery, and 1 information paper about the history of striped bass stocking in North Carolina. Amendment 2 addresses the management strategies for the AR stock and the CSMA stocks separately. Appendix 2 focuses on the AR stock, while appendices 3 and 4 are focused on the CSMA stocks. Appendix 5 addresses a gear-specific issue. I would like to note that recommendations are initial and may change based on public and advisory committee input. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlton Godwin to run you through the AR issue papers.
Okay, thank you, Nathaniel. Now we're moving into Appendix 2, which is the issue paper that contains the sustainable harvest management strategies for the AR stock in the Albemarle Sound and Roanoke River management areas. So the first issue we will discuss is the option to operate under a harvest moratorium or continue with the current TAL, and that's total allowable landings. The divisions and the WRC staff initial recommendation is to continue the use of a TAL to manage harvest. So the rationale for the recommendation begins partly with past experience. A limited TAL was effective in the 1990s in improving and recovering the stock. Additionally, projections show that using a TAL ends the overfished status of the stock in 2026. Well within the 10-year time frame. A moratorium would end the overfished status in 2024. So that's indicated where the lines on the figure here go above the solid black line. Each of the colors show a level of recruitment, with the gray line being projections at low recruitment. As you see, with low recruitment, the number of mature females barely stays above the target. It should be noted, if we don't get some good spawning events soon, future stock assessments updates could indeed indicate a moratorium is necessary. So now let's move on to option 2, which is to consider continuing to manage the ASMA commercial fishery as a bycatch fishery. The divisions and WRC staff initial recommendation is to maintain the bycatch fishery. The bycatch provision was implemented as a management tool in 1995. The bycatch provision requires the weight of striped bass not to exceed 50% of the total landings. Keeping or eliminating the bycatch provision has no impact on sustainable harvest because the fishery closes when the TAL is expected to be reached. The bycatch requirement does serve to discourage additional participants to enter the fishery to just target striped bass and not participate in the other multi-species gillnet fisheries. If hook and line is used commercially, then the bycatch requirement wouldn't be used for that particular gear. So here are the options for the next issue, which is accountability measures to address what happens when the TAL is exceeded. Basically, we have the first two options, which compares the total landings from all the fisheries to the TAL to determine if a payback is necessary. And the first two options are associated with a 10% and 5% buffer, respectively. Option C compares the landings from each individual fishery to that fishery's specific TAL to determine if a payback is necessary and also includes a 5% buffer. Option D is just like option C except without any buffer associated around the TAL. The DMF recommends a pound-for-pound overage paybacks due to the status of the stock and a need to be conservative. WRC staff would prefer a 5% buffer over the TAL to account for uncertainty in the recreational landings estimates. The rationale of the division recommends a conservative approach at this time due to the overfished and overfishing status of the stock. The WRC preference is currently not an option under the accountability strategy to address overages. WRC payback option would be the portion above the buffer back to the TAL. Their reasoning again is to account for uncertainty in estimates of catch. Okay, moving on to the fourth issue, size limits to expand the age structure of the stock. So the options are A, status quo. In the Albemarle Sound management area, maintain an 18-inch minimum size, and in the Roanoke River management area, an 18 to 22-inch harvest slot, with only one fish greater than 27 inches allowed in the creel. Option B would be to increase minimum size limits. Option C, in the Albemarle Sound management area, implement an 18 to 25-inch harvest slot. In the Roanoke River management area, An 18 to 22-inch slot with the one fish greater than 40 inches as a trophy fishery is option D. And then option E, in the Roanoke River Management Area, maintain the current harvest slot limit of 18 to 22 inches with no fish allowed in the daily creel greater than 22 inches. And again, the division and WRC staff's initial recommendations are for options 4C and 4E. So the recommendations for options 4 are based on wanting to protect mature females and increase the number of these older, larger females in the stock. This is the case with implementing an ASMA slot and removing the fish above the slot limit in the RMA. At the last meeting, the Wildlife Resources Commission supported removing that larger fish to protect mature females and their spawning potential. So option 5 discusses gear modifications and area closures to reduce discard mortality. So option A is status quo, to continue commercial harvest of striped bass with gill nets and recreational harvest and catch and release fishing in the ASMA and RMA, including on the spawning grounds. Option B is to not allow harvest of striped bass with gill nets. Option C would be to do not allow harvest or catch and release fishing for striped bass on spawning grounds. Option D is expand the single barbless hook requirement to the entire Roanoke River Management Area during striped bass season. And then option E is implement a requirement to use non-offset barbless circle hooks when fishing with live or natural bait in the inland waters of the Roanoke River, which is upstream of the Highway 258 bridge from May 1st through June the 30th. The division and the WRC staff initial recommendations are for options 5A and 5E. So removing gill nets as a gear to harvest striped bass would increase dead discards and negatively impact the shad and southern flounder fisheries. Expanding the single barbless hook requirement may impact fishers targeting largemouth bass and other sport fish in the Roanoke River. Instead, the Division, Wildlife Resources Commission, and enforcement officers will continue angler education about the best handling practice to reduce dead discards. And additionally, the non-offset barbless hooks with live natural bait will reduce dead discards and increase consistency with ocean striped bass regulations. All right, so this is the last issue for the AR stock, adaptive management. So what is adaptive management? It is a structured process of decision-making, provides flexibility to incorporate new data and information that is available. It's been used since 1994 to open and close seasons, open and close harvest areas, change daily possession limits, and make gillnet modifications as necessary to reduce discards. Also used more recently to close hotspots to reduce interactions with protected species. And it is also used to adjust the tally based on stock assessments and updates to the stock assessments to keep fishing mortality below the fishing mortality target. The divisions and WRC staff's initial recommendations is to support all adaptive management measures. Again, adaptive management allows management to be adjusted to respond to data between full FMP reviews. It's been an integral part of the striped bass FMP since the first one was approved in 1993. It's used to keep harvest below the landings, reduce dead discards, and reduce interactions with protected species. Should be noted that WRC does have a little bit more less proclamation authority compared to the division. So now I will turn it over to Todd Mathis to present the issues for the tar, pamlico, and Neuse River stocks.
All right, so thank you, Charlton. I'm Todd Mathis. I'm a fisheries biologist out of the Washington Regional Office. The CSMA is in the Southern Management Unit, which includes all the water south of the ASMA. The CSMA has 3 stocks: the tar, pamlico, the Neuse, and the Cape Fear River stocks. I'm going to be covering the tar, pamlico, and Neuse River Sustainable Harvest issue paper, and then turn it over to Joe Facendula to cover the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest issue paper, and he'll also be covering the hook and line as a commercial gear issue paper. So option 1 is to continue or end the no position measure. The Division and Wildlife Resources Commission recommend option 1A to continue the no possession measure. Modeling indicates sustainability is unlikely at any level of fishing and is primarily limited by poor natural recruitment. Continuing the commercial and recreational harvest closure provides the best opportunity to evaluate the population response in the absence of fishing mortality. If there are no other significant sources of mortality, such as natural mortality or discord mortality, or other losses to the population, such as leaving the system, no harvest should allow for expansion of the age structure to include fish greater than age 10 to promote natural recruitment. If the no possession management is not maintained, alternative management strategies to promote sustainable harvest must be considered to manage harvest. Management strategies could include managing the fishery with the measures that were in place prior to the no possession measure. Option 2 is maintaining the gillnet closure above the ferry lines. In 2019, the Marine Fisheries Commission directed the Division of Marine Fisheries Director to close waters upstream of the ferry lines to the use of gillnets. In order to maintain this, the management must be selected in Amendment 2. If harvest is allowed in the rivers, the gillnet closure above the ferry line should be reevaluated. The reason for a single option is at the February 2022 Marine Fishery Commission business meeting, the Commission passed a motion to remove option 2B and 2C from Appendix 3. These were the options to allow gill netting above the ferry lines. The rationale for limited gill netting was based on research that showed minimal interactions with striped bass and gill nets set greater than 200 yards from shore. Adaptive management allows for management to be adjusted to respond to data between full FMP reviews. The division supports option 3. It gives managers the flexibility to pivot and change management strategies when new information or data becomes available. Fishery independent surveys will continue to be used to monitor striped bass stocks in the Tarpamico and Neuse River systems. In 2017, the division initiated a seine and trawl survey to capture young of year striped bass on the Tarpamico and Neuse Rivers. Also, the division's gillnet surveys and the Wildlife Resources Commission spawning ground surveys will be used to monitor the stocks. Adaptive management, as laid out in Amendment 2, schedules a review of fishery independent data through 2024 in 2025 and allows for adjustment of management measures and considerations for additional strategies. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joe Fischendela to cover the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest issue paper and the hook and line as a commercial gear issue paper.
Thanks, Todd. So in Appendix 4 in the FMP is the Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest issue paper. The first management option in this issue paper is to maintain the no possession provision. The no possession measure was implemented in 2008 to increase the age structure and abundance of Cape Fear River striped bass. And maintaining this no possession provision would continue to limit fishing mortality in the system and protect the fish known to be successfully spawning there. The Division of Marine Fisheries recommends maintaining this no possession provision so we can fully evaluate striped bass that are accessing the spawning grounds, either from passage at the newly renovated lock and dam at Lock and Dam 1, the fish passage structure, or during modified flow pulses, and to also further assess the wild spawning that's being documented to occur in the system. Allowing any harvest during the spawning season may target impact fish making successful passage to spawn. Option 2 is allowing seasonal harvest in all Cape Fear River fishing waters. And the WRC recommends allowing harvest in all fishing waters of the Cape Fear River. The rationale for this is the Wildlife Resources Commission recommends allowing harvest in the Cape Fear River to provide opportunities for harvest of this hatchery-supported stock. Despite 13 years of no harvest, the population remains primarily stocked fish, with limited spawning, and they believe access to the spawning grounds is unlikely before the next plan review. The remaining options, option 3 is allowing seasonal harvest in the joint and inland fishing waters in the Cape Fear River only above the 140 bridge. Option 4 was allowing seasonal harvest in inland fishing waters only on the main stem of the Cape Fear River. And option 5 is adaptive management. And adaptive management would allow us to assess any evidence of natural reproduction and modify management as needed. DMF does support adaptive management. This would allow us to look at any changes in successful spawning, whether it through the genetic work or young of the year surveys, and adjust any management. Appendix 5 is looking at the use of hook and line as a commercial gear. Amendment 1 to the striped bass FMP changed rules to allow hook and line to be used in the future as an adaptive management tool if regulation to the use of gill nets required an additional harvest gear. This issue paper examines management considerations with implementing hook and line as a commercial gear and if this is an appropriate time to allow the gear. Option 1 is do not allow hook and line as a commercial gear for estuarine striped bass. Option 2 is to allow it. And option 3 is that adaptive management, and the adaptive management could be triggered by landings. DMF does not recommend allow using hook and line as a commercial gear for estuarine striped bass. The rationale for this is due to the current overfishing stock status and the current low TAL in the only management area open to the commercial harvest of striped bass. We recommend to not allow the commercial use of hook and line at this time. However, we do recommend to use adaptive management to maintain hook and line as a gear option if it's needed in the future as stock status improves. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Charlton to handle the questions.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And I just also want to note that our contact information is provided on the screen if anyone wishes to reach out to any of the leads as we go through the next steps of the development of the striped bass FMP. And with that, I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thanks, Charlton. So Sarah, it'll go back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the listening session. I think these are really good. If people will take the time to they'll learn a whole. The committee, if you have questions relative to the presentation, please raise your hand.
I got a question. I don't see my hand raised button on my screen.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering from the full draft document from the Striped Bass Amendment to the FMP plan. I want to go into more detail on page 91 through 96 with some of the staff. It's the study about gear restrictions and limits that DMF tested in the Neuse and Pamlico rivers. I was just wondering if one of the biologists could give me some more detail about that part of the draft FMP.
So just restate that again.
Inside the full draft FMP, the section starts on page 91, the gear restrictions and limits.
Right.
It's where you're looking at basically looking at the commercial discards in the central southern management area and the recreational discards in the central southern management area.
Yeah. So, one of the tables is table 3.1, and it does show recreational dead discards and then commercial dead discards. One thing that you can see in there is, they're somewhat comparable. The dead discards are a lot lower. And what you can see is since the implementation of the ferry line closure, it looks like we've had a little bit of drop in the commercial dead discards since that time.
Yeah, I guess that this part of the draft FMP was put in here, where it lines up with the decision document would be whether or not to maintain the gillnet closure above the ferry lines. Is that what this paper was kind of referencing?
Yeah, I mean, this part of the section definitely is looking at that. We had information that some of the interactions, like say with American Shad during that closure, weren't really a factor in toward for striped bass discards and such. And so we reviewed some of the observer data, specifically looking at the amount of striped bass dead discards above the ferry lines. And really what we found is, and also it was suggested that the American shad and hickory shad kind of are more in the centers of the river in the Tar Pamlico and Noose, a little bit different than I think in the Roanoke. And they suggested that there weren't really a lot of interactions, say greater than, a certain distance, 1,000 yards or something. So in the observer data, we were able to break it out by the distance from shore of these observations. And so we were, able to kind of show that, if for the nets that were fished that were observed, the ones that were greater than 200 yards, the likelihood of interacting with striped bass was very, very low.
Yeah, and as I was looking into this, I saw there was also a paper put out by Rock et al. Looking at the reducing striped bass discards into commercial gear when they put a 36-inch tie down, and also had the large mesh gill nets 50 yards on the bank. And I believe did that show a 60 or 70% reduction?
I think it was
in
a
discards?
75%.
75, wow.
Reduction for the before they had the management measures in place, and then compared it to after the management measures were in place, and that was about a 75% reduction.
And that's been in place since 2008 on the books.
Yeah, since 2008 is I think, but when the MFC put that management measure in place. Correct.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it looks to me from the table you got on here, all the recent landings in the past 8 to 10 years, the recreation dead discards have been 2 or 3 times higher than the commercial dead discards in the central southern management area.
It has. So, there were a couple of years. 2017 was a really big one when we had just a ton of fish captured in the recreational fishery. I want to say 130,000 or something like that. So, I mean, you apply that a percentage to those releases, and yeah, it's definitely a larger number than the commercial number.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Jamie?
Yeah, I had a question about the CSMA also. So the commercials just flat out haven't been allowed there, small or large mash. Even like I know we did a jack fishery, which was in like a 4-inch or 3 and 15/16 inch net, and we had a lot of observer coverage, and probably a lot of the observer data they used to compare probably came from us because we had a lot of observers on our boat, and we had a very clean fishery, especially with our jack fishery. And I just would like to ask why it was indiscriminately put out there as all gill nuts at the meeting in February instead of just small or large, and then a combination of both. That was my first question. And the second one was the wrecks are still in there catching and releasing or catching and killing striped bass in the Noose hard as they can. And the commercial just is flat out denied access. So is there a way to say no access if nobody can access it, or to make it a little bit more fair where we can go and have rules?
So I'm not exactly sure that I can answer the why part of the first question. I mean, it may have been that we were really only proposing to have kind of that American shad fishery, which is typically a large mesh gill net fishery. in the issue paper itself, we did talk about small mesh gill nets and potentially allowing those in some fashion, and even talked about maybe the advantage of strike nets and such, because they're an active gear. What I can say is, I mean, as you know, we already have a lot of measures in place in those areas to deal with the gill nets and such, but I'm not sure about why the commissioners did that, or only have that one. And then what was your second question?
So when we were shut out in 2019, and it was supposed to be for 2 years, we weren't allowed to go in the water at all with gear, any kind of net from the ferry line up. So we're 100% out of the equation for any fish being removed. However, the wreck fishermen can still go and throw their hooks and catch fish. And we know that every time that a fish is hooked is definitely the likelihood that it could die. And so they're indiscriminately killing what you're trying to save by being allowed to go even in warm water, and catch the striped bass. So we 100% removed from the equation. And while they can't keep it, they're still killing. So I'm just wondering, is there a way to make it more fair, allow us some access to it and the nets that we know are far off the shore and we're not harming striped bass, to still give access to both sectors?
Yeah, and that was the whole reason why we reviewed the observer data, is to try to allow that fishery. That's probably the fishery that was impacted maybe the most. In that area, the shad fishery occurs up in those other areas. Some of the other fishing can occur in different areas as well. And we didn't really have as much small mesh observer data to come to the same conclusion as we did with the amount of information we had with the large mesh data in the shad fishery. And then just to speak to about the shutout since 2019 for 2 years, in the supplement itself, we were going to, trying to do it as quick as we can. It was to, protect 2 important year classes of fish, but really the supplement was going to be put in place until through the adoption of this FMP. So that's kind of always where it was. I think there's some maybe miscommunication in terms of the 2-year closure. But we're working through the plan now, and provided some means of potential access. But obviously that was removed. I understand what you're saying about wanting to have a fishery up there. We're managing striped bass, not other fisheries, so to speak. But those are decisions for the Marine Fishery Commissioners.
Madam Chair, this is Steve Poland, Fishery Management Section Chief. If I may, I can provide some additional clarity to Ms. Winslow's questions.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right. Jamie. So to your first question, the Marine Fisheries Commission, they did pass a motion in February to take the other options in this action out. They did not provide rationale for that, other than that they, as a body, were not in favor of considering it. And as far as your second question, relative to the 2019 closure, this FMP is the opportunity for the Marine Fisheries Commission to consider modifying that management. As the AC and as a stakeholder, this is certainly appropriate time to voice any opinions there are on that closure, but ultimately it is up to the Marine Fisheries Commission to decide how to
manage that fishery upstream of the ferry lines. If they want to continue to keep nets out of that or modify that some way.
Thank you, Steve. Jim Rice?
Thank you, Sarah. This question regards the CSMA, and the stocking that goes on there. So the agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service that they established with DMF and Wildlife Commission in '86 was entered into specifically for restoration of self-sustaining stocks of anadromous species, with the principal emphasis on striped bass, because that's restoration as part of their mission. Will they continue to pay to rear and stock fish if the goal is no longer reestablishing a natural self-sustaining population? When we quit pretending that we're going to get them back.
The simple answer to that is no.
So who would do it?
What's that?
Who would do it? The Wildlife Commission stocks striped bass in reservoirs, just purely as a recreational fishery, and it's kind of analogous to that, but in a river.
The Wildlife Commission stocks in the Cape Fear River.
Are they the only ones who stock? They rear the fish for the Cape Fear?
Yes.
And where do the fish for the other rivers come from? Those come from the Edenton Fish Hatchery?
Yes, they come from Edenton National Fish Hatchery for the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse rivers.
Hey, Mr. Rice, this is Dr. Rice, this is Charlton real quick. I'll just clarify and then hand it over to Chris Smith with the Wildlife Commission if he wants to touch on that. So yes, originally, when that stocking started, the Fish and Wildlife Service stocked all three rivers on a rotating basis, 100,000 in each two of the three rivers. In about 2000 and maybe 11 or so, I'm not sure exactly when they renovated the Waffa hatchery in order to start stocking 100,000 fish in each river. The Edenton hatchery doesn't have quite that pond capacity to stock 300,000 fish. So Edenton, since that time, Edenton National Fish Hatchery stocks the Tar Pam and the Neuse, and the Waffa Fish Hatchery stocks the Cape Fear River. And again, if Chris or anybody on the Wildlife Commission wants to add anything to that, feel free.
Well, I just brought it up because, we talk about stocking like it's a given, but it costs a heck of a lot of money. And the premise for them doing that isn't going to be there anymore. So something to consider.
Thank you, Jim.
Jim, we're still hopeful. I'm sorry, this is Kirk with the Wildlife Commission. We're still hopeful that we can meet the goal of self-sustaining population on the Tar and Neuse River. We'll see how that plays out, and then it's definitely a big question, and see where the funding would come from to continue stocking. I'm hoping that stocking will go on regardless, but hopefully we can on the Tar and Neuse at least have a self-sustaining population and meet that goal. Cape Fear is a little different ball game, and we'll see how that funding plays out in the future.
Thanks.
I've got a question on the stocking. We're stocking basically hybrids, is that correct?
No, we've never stocked hybrids in the coastal rivers. They do stock hybrids in the reservoirs. We used to have a problem with hybrid striped bass coming out of the Jordan Reservoir in the Cape Fear River. Again, several years ago, through the FMP process and just noticing that we were seeing more hybrid bass and wild bass in the Cape Fear, they stopped stocking hybrid bass in the reservoirs. So no, sir, it's just wild strain brood stock collected from those rivers and hatched out and put back in there.
I got you. So now with the recent advancement in figuring out how to get the fry out of these wonderful domesticated wild striped bass. We talk about, Jim just said, a heck of a lot of money. I learned over the weekend that I could buy phase 2 fry for 10 cents a piece. That's 10,000, it's $1,000 on 10,000 fish. It suddenly doesn't seem like a heck of a lot of money anymore, even when we're talking about 300,000 fish. For government money, man, they spend more than that on toilet paper every day in DC. So a heck of a lot of money is not a big issue anymore. If I can go to the NC State facility right there in South Creek and buy fish for 10 cents a piece. So, you know, the whole financial aspect of this thing, I think, is really changing as we sit here, because they have been able to just turn the switch, turn the lights on, and turn the temperature down and make these fish breed, you know, it just like magic. I think big advancements have been made, so a heck of a lot of money it's not what it once was.
I don't have them right here in front of me, but we've got stocking numbers for the entire stocking operation that I can get you that, you know, go through how much it costs for everything, grow out to phase 2 size. Certainly stocking fry is a lot cheaper than growing fry in ponds, but we certainly have those numbers. And I know we actually had an information fact sheet at one time on our webpage that talked all about that, but I'll get you the exact numbers. But again, they're probably 5 years old now, so they, you know, they may have changed.
Like I said, I think things are changing. You know, Dr. Ben Redding from NC State there is, you know, he's doing great things in this field of growing domestic wild striped bass, and I think it's going to change what we're seeing in our rivers if we could start using those fish. And through selective breeding, he's growing some fish and putting out eggs that are a much faster grower than we've ever seen before. Now we've got 3 to 5 pound fish in 2 years. That's a game changer in my eyes. You know, that's a big damn difference. I think we've got a little off track here. We started talking about the gillnet closure up the rivers, and now we're back to stocking. We can do this kind of all night. Personally, I'd really like to address go back to this gillnet issue up the rivers. It certainly does not seem to be affecting striped bass. Can we all agree that closing these gillnets is not adversely affecting the striped bass population, as it was back in you know, after they put the tie down restrictions and all that, you know, the 200 yards offshore and going back to those parameters? I think that the striped bass were well protected from the gillnets.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. But I think also the gillnet closure above the Fairlands has offered some protection for them as well. But it's not to say that, you know, prior to that, when we had a normal season, you know, everything was in place. There was an abundance of striped bass, the overall population, and we had tie down and distance from shore measures in place, and those were,
and we grew
measures.
We grew that great population with those measures in place.
Yes, those measures are definitely effective. Yes.
All right. How about our committee here? I'd like to try and make a motion on this, even though our net hating commissioners have said they don't want to hear it. I'd like to force them to hear this one more time, because it greatly affects me every day. Yes, sir.
Keith, this is Sarah. If we can
Hey,
hold
Sarah.
off on the motions until we get through with the questions, and then we'll go through each section with each issue one by one instead of jumping into motions right now.
All right, that's fine. I was just trying to stop the jumping around, but you can please take control of the meeting. I'm sorry, Sarah. It's been a while since I've been up here all fired up, and I'm not seeing everybody. And oh boy, you know how I get.
Since I've seen you.
It's been a long time. Yes, ma'am.
We've missed you, Keith. We've missed you.
Thank you, Jim.
Jim, did you have another question? Your hand's still up.
Sorry.
That's all right. Other questions from committee members? Jamie?
Sorry, I have another question. This time it's on the towel. So I think the commercial had 24,000-ish pounds this year for our towel, for our shad season. And of course, last Friday, the proclamation came out, and I might be wrong on this, but I had heard we were a hair over 16,000 at that point, and I guess we were waiting for the rest of the data to come in. And so we were closed, effective Monday. My question is, we know how to manage our towel because we have the proclamations and we get them by email, and when they go in effect, we're done. And you're counting the pounds by our trip tickets, where when we take in a rock, the number of how many rock we present and the poundage that we show up with is tallied. How long before we implement this on the rec side, because they always blow their towel out of the water and they still get their usually full season, at least like flounder went way over, rock tends to go way over because there's no accountability on their poundage. Is there a way that we're gonna address that to make it be more fair?
So for the, so I guess let me start off with first just explaining the difference in the way the recreational landings are estimated for every other species in North Carolina's, estuarine marine waters and striped bass. So, MRIP, the National Marine Fisheries Service Creel Survey, which we supplement a lot with additional sampling, they estimate landings for all of the other estuarine and ocean species, speckled trout, red drum, this, that, and other. The division and the Wildlife Resources Commission has a specific creel survey just for striped bass in the Albemarle Sound Management Area and the Central Southern Management Areas and the Roanoke River Management Area, because those MRIP sampling does not come that far into the coastal waters. So we have the ability with the recreational creel survey to estimate landings. It's nowhere close as, daily like we do with the commercial landings, but it's certainly within a couple of weeks lag time. We can have estimates of harvest, which is, MRIP. They're nowhere close to that right now. So we do have that ability, but yes, and I mean, if you look, the towel was exceeded this past year in the Roanoke River Management Area, but it was quite a small towel. I think if you look in the full FMP document, there's a big table in there that shows what the towel and the overages are. So that's about on page 57. But I mean, in short, accountability measures are in here. This is the lowest towel we have ever operated on in the Albemarle Sound, Roanoke River management areas. Even in the 90s when we were rebuilding and having all those poor spawns, the towel was, 150,000 pounds. We're talking about a 25,000 pound commercial towel, and then a 12,500 pound towel for the two recreational management areas. So it's going to be it's going to be difficult to manage within those towels in the coming years, most likely. But payback measures are, absolutely part of this plan. And if we, just like in Southern Flounder, if either the commercial or the recreational sectors go over, they will pay those poundages back, just like we have done this year. The commercial sector went over last year just by 1,000 or so pounds. Roanoke River Management Area did go over by quite a bit to their towel, and they are paying some of that back this year as well. So we do have accountability measures, and we can close the recreational season a little bit quicker. And in general, when the towel's been a little higher, we've been pretty close with hitting our mark. I hope that answers your question.
Jamie, you good with that?
I feel like we need to expedite trip tickets for rec fishing, if that's how we're going to manage ours. Because like you said, if there was a 2-week lag time, well, we got 12 days and they're saying we hit our 24,000. So if you have a 2-week lag time, I don't see how they're going to keep them in check. If they had, you think you're over and then you process data for 2 more weeks, you blew it out of the water. I feel like they need trip tickets. And we have apps on our phones and paper, and I think the only way to really enforce people reporting what they catch is if it's a law.
Other questions from committee members? The comment that was made earlier relative to phase 2 stocking, and who was paying for it, is it not any longer part of the federal aid project for relative to CSMA?
A part of some of that stocking is indeed, Madam Chair, part of some of the federal aid. Part of it is, some of it is most of it from the actual federal aid funds from the state is for the tagging aspect of it. I believe the last information we had about the stocking is it's about $1.28 per fish to grow out to phase 2 fish. And so yes, we spend a lot of state employee staff time and some of our federal dollars, but as far as actually the Fish and Wildlife Service staff growing those fish out, those are paid out of annual U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's annual, operational budget. But we are still paying for tags, PBT analysis, especially for the CSMA stocks to identify stock versus hatchery fish. So yes, Madam Chair, it is kind of a collaborative process still.
So really, you say the last estimate was $1.28. So really, that hadn't really changed in the last 30 years, because that's pretty much what it was when the program started. And of course, relative to stocking in the CSMA, the whole time it's pretty much been a put, grow, and take fishery. Once those fish reach legal size, you saw the landings go up, whether it be in tarpan or Pamlico, whether it be in noose. And then essentially, once you saw those fish move into the fisheries, it wasn't long before they dropped off. Relative to the AR stock, I know you said that, of course, discard mortality has dropped significantly relative to the gillnet fisheries and AR stock since the early 90s. One of the things, as far as was required by Congress for the report to Congress on the AR stock, that Dr. Rulson actually did a lot of the work, was the food chain interruption. I know the flow regimes have not been adhered to because of flow control a lot, but the report to Congress essentially outlined that flow regime requirement during striped bass spawning season. But the disruption in the food chain that occurred in the lower part of the river, whether it be from phytoplankton, zooplankton shifts, has any of that work been updated?
The last work that was done on that, I don't know, not really within the last, I know some research at ECU did some, I can't remember the exact date. There was some in the Albemarle Sound, but in the lower Roanoke, I'm not sure. It's been probably not in the last 10 years has any of that been updated. I can say that in some of our larval work that we do at the division, and of course it's not a study at all to try to come up with abundance estimates of zooplankton or that any of those, but we do see most all of our tows when we do collect larval fish. We do see have lots of zooplankton in there, and they typically have zooplankton in their gut. But it's probably been 10 years at least since there's been a study that looked specifically at zooplankton abundance for those larval fish in the lower Roanoke River.
And of course, in the last 10 years or more recent, we've seen increases in blue-green algae blooms and eutrophication and DO sags like we saw in the late 80s and early 80s. How about anything relative to any updated hook and release mortality studies?
No, ma'am, we've not, done any in the Albemarle Sound, or Roanoke, for hook and release studies, in those systems. No, ma'am, not since those last ones, Nelson, in the Roanoke, and then, our staff, Gearhart and some others did some, hadn't been updated on that either.
So what's the percentage applied now?
We're still using the overall percentage of 6.4%. There has been some discussion at the last stock assessment about trying to use, monthly or seasonal changes in percentages of discard mortality. At our stock assessment, they actually did a pretty deep dive into that at the last ASMFC striped bass coastwide stock assessment, looking at all of the studies up and down the entire coast, in the Chesapeake Bay, Hudson, Delaware rivers, out in the mouths of those in Massachusetts and whatnot. And they just, at least for the coastwide assessment, it just seemed like trying to do the seasonal mortality. It all kind of washed out in the end to about the same. But of course, now the coastwide assessment uses, I think, about 9.6% discard mortality, as opposed to the 6.4% that we use, which was derived from the study in the Roanoke River in the early mid-90s. And again, that was an overall average of that mortality for the whole time period. Of course, mortality is higher in the summer and lower in the cooler months of the year.
Thank you, Charlton. Jim?
Thank you, Sarah. This question kind of follows up on yours about river conditions. We've had 5 years in a row of virtually recruitment failure in the Roanoke. Is there anything that can be done beyond the sort of the normal flow agreement to get ideal flows in the, this year, next, couple of years in a row here till we get some bounce back?
So I know Chris Smith with the Wildlife Commission is up here. If he wants to jump in afterwards, I'll feel free, but I'll take a quick stab at it first. So the Wildlife Commission and some DWR staff are on those calls with the Corps, weekly, just probably several times a week. And really, out of that period from 2017 through 2022, the only year that we didn't have rainfall in the spring that created just, the Kerr Reservoir just doesn't have a whole lot of storage capacity. And once we get so much rain, the Corps tries to drop it down as low as they can to allow for it to be able to have some holding capacity. So we try to stay within that guide curve. But from 2017 to 2021, it was just out of the banks, above 12,000, sometimes 25, 30,000 for that whole time period. So the only one year, this past year, 2021, was the first year that we actually had good flows where we kind of wanted them. So I don't think there's anything else available for them to do. But again, Chris Smith with the Wildlife Commission can add on to that if I've missed something.
Hey, Charlton, this is Jeremy McCargo. I'm made it on the call. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, we can, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry to overstep Chris there, but I do call the Corps weekly and more than weekly during the spring. The past few years, because we've known we've been in a wet period, we've even tried to keep the lake below the spring guide curve to have more storage capacity, and the Corps has been willing to do that. Kind of start the season off at 301 instead of 302, which is the guide curve level. And we still just have had too much rain to even hold back any of that water. It's just an extra foot of storage, but that's a lot of acre feet of water. But yeah, I mean, they are willing to do what we can recommend, within certain bounds. What they are not willing to do is hold back the floodwaters and risk taking the lake
too high because then they run into impacts of road closures where bridges are flooded over the lake. Of course, they have to worry about campground closures and recreational usage as well. But more importantly, they are concerned by holding back too much water. If they don't get rid of enough water and the lake level is at 308 or 310, and then we get another rain on top of that, then we're in big trouble because once the lake gets over 312, they've got to really release a lot of water and wouldn't be able to control the flood downstream. So long story short, though, yeah, we work hand in hand with the Corps, and when we've had too much rain, unfortunately, we have to have floods during the spring spawning season, and that has been the case more often than not in the last several years.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Jamie, did you have another question?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, your hand was up. Any other questions from the committee?
I had a short follow-up from actually what you said, Chairwoman. You said the fries were $1.28, the cost stocking fee. I think you just said when you were talking to Chairwoman Winslow.
So there's a difference between fry, phase one, and phase two, right? And it's a size difference.
Right.
So what we were talking about was phase two, which are, 7-inch fish.
Right.
So that's what we were talking about.
And you said it was $1.28 a fish.
That's, yes, at the time that we got that information, yeah.
And you're releasing 300,000, the 100,000 each river of the phase two.
Yes.
Well, that sounds like a deal to me. I mean, that's, my math is $384,000 to release 300,000 fish. Recreational fishermen want to keep some of these fish. You could raise license prices $1 and put in 600,000 fish, for a put and take fishery. Just when y'all said that was an expensive endeavor, I thought you were talking about $4 or $5 million or something, but $380,000 is a drop in the bucket nowadays in government spending. So, I mean.
And do you have I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you have a breakdown of how much of that is actually buying the fish itself and how much of that is the labor involved in tagging it and tracking it and checking it? And, the fish has got to cost X, but when you're done with it, it's got to cost.
Well, the fish is free because they're out electrofishing and capturing the brood stock. And then they have probably 2 or 3 females and 4 or 5 males. And then they, put hormones in there, and that's what then produces the eggs, and they fertilize the eggs. So they're raising them from eggs at the hatchery. They're not buying fry and then raising those.
All right. So the fish itself.
So it's the cost of raising the fish.
It's right.
Food, it's labor. It's, fish and wildlife with tar pamlico in this.
Right. And I just want to follow up. Y'all been doing the phase two stocking in the Cape Fear since the late 60s and in the New Seneca since the late 70s. Is that correct? The phase two stocking?
I think it sounds about right.
I think that was in the draft paper.
I think so. Yeah.
But I mean, if y'all been doing the stocking for this long and the fish have yet to have a sustaining population, you've got to keep it up.
Well, I mean, we don't have any intentions of not continuing stocking.
Right.
And those stockings were not on an annual basis. Sometimes they were staggered.
Well, I'm wondering why discards even matter in the recreational and commercial sector. If it's a bought and paid for fish, it's bought and paid for by the citizens. Why can't they catch and keep or discard these fish? What does it matter?
Well, we're not into the put, grow, take fishery quite yet, right? So we've just learned that we don't have natural reproduction, and that's kind of a new thing. And so then, once we knew that, now that's kind of really the focus is to protect the fish and let them increase spawning stock biomass. We've had a truncated population with fish really not over 8 years old or so. I mean, some. So we want to build that up. And so that's kind of where we are now. And of course, I mean, it's up to the recommendations. You keep the fishery closed. You could open the fishery. If you open the fishery, you could modify it seasonally, areas, all those kinds of things. I think we all know that the fishery prior to the closure was an active fishery that provided access to people. So, right. And
sorry, Joe Facindola also has some input, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
Not yet, but I was getting ready, just thinking about it. But so Cape Fear, there is actually some, reproduction occurring. So not all CSMA rivers are, without reproduction. It's limited, but it's there.
Yeah, my main reason behind the argument was, if all of these fish or the majority of these fish are bought and paid for by the citizens, why can't the citizens keep a few instead of making it a strictly catch and release fisheries in a moratorium? I think that's something that needs to be looked at, especially with the decline in quota in southern flounder and other species for all fishermen across the board to capitalize opportunities on. I just wanted to put that in everybody's mind.
And one other aspect to this is, we do have mixing with the AR stock in CSMA rivers. So that's a consideration too, where, we have acoustic tags that we're tracking some of these fish. And so we're kind of learning, that we've got some hatchery fish in the CSMA systems, tar, pamlico, and new specifically, but we also have AR fish. And so, that's kind of a side reason, right? That's offering protection to those fish that are, overfished, and overfishing is occurring now. So, that's just another aspect of it to consider.
Yeah,
Sarah, could I make one comment?
Jim, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, we did a research study on the Neuse River, and those phase 2 fish that were stocked had about a 90% mortality rate within 1 year. So when you put in 100,000 fish, you're not going to get anywhere close to 100,000 fish, making it up to a catchable size. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and just to that, one of the, not a recommendation, but in the issue paper, through the demographic matrix model was to stock more fish is one of the suggestions there. And then that's kind of a little bit limited by capacity at the hatcheries. So we can't really increase that too much. And a lot of that is based on how well the brood stock produced eggs, the quality of eggs, and how many they actually got. Some fish, female fish produce better and some are not as good. So there's variability there.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing no hands, we'll go to public comment. I'm not sure who with the division has the list and will be recognizing people.
Sarah, I can do that. This is Laura Klebansky.
Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
Absolutely. So we're going to start, if we could, with the CDO. We'll then go to the Dare County location. So here we have Glenn Skinner. If you'll come up.
All right, Glenn Skinner, Executive Director of North Carolina Fisheries Association, came here today to ask the Northern Advisory Committee to recommend to the North Carolina Marine Fisheries Commission that they lift the net prohibition above the Neuse River and Pamlico River ferry lines. Heard a lot of discussion about that already tonight, and a couple of points I want to touch on. You've already heard staff say that the gill net restrictions in place prior to prohibiting gill nets up there were effective at reducing mortality in the striped bass fishery. And we had that huge increase in the stock while the gill nets were up there and while harvest was also allowed. We put this moratorium in place to protect an abundance of fish we hadn't seen in a long time. Again, that abundance increase occurred while harvest in both sectors was allowed and while the gill net fishery above the ferry lines was allowed. There's no reason to think if you figure out water flow and some of these other environmental issues that you can't build this stock while allowing access to the striped bass fishery and the other fisheries that have been choked out by this gill net prohibition. Keith Bruno mentioned his impacts. I'm also a fisherman. I've been impacted. I disagree that the white shad fishery was the biggest fishery impacted. Probably the mullet fishery, summertime mullet fishery in that area, which almost primarily occurred as a strike net fishery above those ferry lines, has been most impacted. You have white perch, you have spots, speckled trout, white shad, hickory shad, the list goes on and on. That's where much of the fishing occurred in both of these river systems. And there was no reason for it. The Marine Fisheries Commission forced the director to issue this proclamation after he had declined when he was requested to. They called an emergency meeting with 2 days' notice, absolutely no public comment, disregarded the science and forced the director to do this. And shortly after that, Secretary of DEQ, Michael Regan, issued a press release, a public press release condemning the MFC for their actions. To my knowledge, that's never happened before. The point is, this was unnecessary and it needs to be lifted. It's not necessary now. It needs to go back to the way it was before with the protection for striped bass, the tie downs, the setbacks. But we need to get access to these other fisheries again. And I'm hoping Keith Bruno and some of the other committee members will touch on this, as you go on. And I would really appreciate y'all making a motion to recommend that the commission look at this issue again. And that I'll be here through the meeting. If anybody has any questions, feel free. Maybe the chairwoman will let me answer some of them. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to the Dare County location now. So first up, we have Steve House. And if you would just introduce yourself, please. We are not hearing you on this end, so let me just double check.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
All right.
Go.
I'm Dare County Commissioner Steve House. I'm going to read to you a resolution that was adopted by our Board of Commissioners in a unanimous vote. And whereas the North Carolina Department of Marine Fisheries is considering Amendment 2 to the Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan. And whereas the North Carolina Fisheries Reform Act of 1997 requires the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries prepare fishery management plans for adoption by North Carolina Marine Fisheries Commission for all commercially and recreationally significant species or fishes that compromise the state marine or estuarine resources, with the goal of these plans to ensure the long-term viability of the fisheries. And whereas North Carolina is the only state that allows fishing of the striped bass species during spawning season and in the spawning areas during spawning season. And whereas the NCDMF data shows catch and release mortality in the Roanoke River Management Area at 182,481 dead discards since 1997, while there have only been 53,880 in the Albemarle Sound Management Area since 1997. And whereas the ASMA is 667,674 acres with a 6-month season that is not during the spawning season. And whereas, sorry, lost my place. In the RRMA is 6,420 acres with a 1-week season that is during and on the spawning grounds. Whereas RRMA catch and release is March 1st through June 30th with an open harvest of April 30th through April 24th through April 30th, and spawning season for the striped bass is March through April. And whereas the ASMA 6-month season quota was reduced from 206,250 pounds in 2020 to only 38,412 pounds in 2021, a reduction of 81.376%, and finished the 2021 season at 4,546 pounds under quota, where the RRMA's 1-week season went 14,742 pounds over quota. Therefore, be it resolved that the Dare County Board of Commissioners hereby endorses shifting a greater allocation of the striped bass quota to the ASMA in order to protect, preserve the striped bass stock, thus increasing the striped bass species and chances of spawning and growing the stock. This was adopted on the 7th day of March 2022. And thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Reese Stetcher.
My name is Reese Stecker. I've run a center console charter boat since 1997. Can I ask for clarification on a couple things from the printout that we have? Is that possible? Hello?
I'll defer to the chair.
If you'll keep it brief, Reese.
What do you say? Oh, okay. I'm asking for clarification on Appendix 2, number 3A. It talks about exceeding the TAL by 10% in a single calendar year. And the overage will be issued out the following year. I'm trying to read the table on the next side, but RRMA, they went 14,272 pounds over quota. They caught 2 quotas last year. But I don't see how you're saying they're supposed to be penalized the following year, but they have a 4-day season coming up this year. They're not being penalized. I mean, I'm trying to understand how you have an appendix in 3A, and it says they're supposed to be penalized, but technically they're not. Am I wrong, or am I reading this wrong?
So this is Charlton. So the quota accountability measures and the TAL payback options for this in this document is for Amendment 2. So we're operating under the quota payback for Amendment 1. So yes, under that quota payback system, the entire TAL has to be exceeded before paybacks are made. So that happened. You're right. The Roanoke River Management Area went over almost by twice their quota, I think. But we were under the total TAL was still the ASMA recreational sector went below their quota. They didn't harvest theirs. So at any rate, we have paid back the overage from last year based on the current TAL policy payback. And so the last year, the Roanoke River Management Area had a 2-week season. Their harvest estimates, their allowed harvest for this year, I think they calculated it at, I got it right here. So we did have a difference of opinion of the way that TAL was going to be calculated, but at any rate, they calculated their this year's quota was 6,578 pounds instead of the 12,804 pounds. So that's why they have a 4-day season this coming year instead of a 2-week season. And they did reduce the bag limit from 2 fish to 1 fish.
But
does that answer your question?
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to, it doesn't seem like a penalty when they caught twice their quota and they get a season the next year. How is that considered a penalty? It is what it is, but the numbers that I got from you showed that they went 14,000 where is it? 14,742 pounds over quota. Their quota was 12,180. So they doubled their quota, and they're being rewarded with a 4-day season. I don't see how that's a penalty when they get a season the following year, even though they caught 2 quotas the previous year. Anyway, it doesn't make sense to, I guess my brain doesn't work like others, but it seems like they're being rewarded.
Reese,
Yes, ma'am.
you got to remember that they're operating currently under Amendment 1, and that adhered to what the requirements were under Amendment 1. Amendment 2, the options are to change that.
Okay, well, a lot of that stuff's confusing to me, but anyway, I guess I'll move on. As mentioned, I've been running a charter boat for 25 plus years. I don't agree. I respect Charlton and Dr. Cornegy. I do not agree with them that this striped bass population is in such dire straits. We've had really, really good fish in the past half dozen or maybe more years. But if there is indeed a problem with the striped bass population in North Carolina's internal waters, the solution is a no-brainer. The very first place you start would be to eliminate a catch season. I'm not saying eliminate a catch and release season, but you eliminate a catch season during the spawn on the spawning grounds. Roanoke Rapids Management Area is the only place in the United States with a catch kill season for striped bass on the spawning grounds during the spawn. And if you're not going to eliminate that, then at the very least, the quota allocation should be based on what Steve's touching on the water area being fished. The NC, MFC, and you guys need to put a suggestion forward that they reconsider allocation on the recreational side quota and add that to the draft plan as an FMP option. The facts are the facts. Albemarle Sound, 667,674 acres with a 6-month season. That is not during or on the spawning grounds. Fact, the Roanoke Rapids Management Area is 6,420 acres. ASMA is 104 times larger than RRMA. The ASMA quota was cut last year by 81.376%. ASMA came in 4,546 pounds under quota in 2021. RRMA came in a 2-week season, 14,742 pounds over quota, and they're going to get a season next year. There have been 182,481 dead discards in RRMA dating back to 97. There's been 53,880 in ASMA. And there's actually, I didn't even know this until today, I totaled up. Even on the commercial side, the netters only had 133,235 pounds during the same stretch. Roanoke Rapids had 182,481. I mean, this data comes from table on the Albemarle Roanoke stated managed species estuarine striped bass AR table 1. If you read this table, the number 1 killer of striped bass in North Carolina waters is dead discards from the Roanoke Rapids Management Area group. I mean, it's a fact. We're fishing, ASMA is fishing an area that's 104 times bigger. We're fishing, and Roanoke Rapids is fishing 88.34% less days. They're fishing 104 times smaller area, same exact quota. If you go to this dead discard data, in 2018 and 2019, Roanoke Rapids Management Area had more dead discards, and that's numbers of fish, that's not pounds. They had almost 12,000 pounds both years. That's more than the 8250 in total poundage landings for Albemarle Sound. If you base on pounds, they've got twice the pounds of dead discards if you're just basing on a 2-pound fish. Anyhow, are we worried about the resource, or are we worried about the economy of Roanoke Rapids? If we're worried about the economy, that place is going to continue going. I know all these guys. There's one of them in the room. 95% of fishing they do over there is catch and release, and they've got great fishing for that. And I'm not saying to take it, but when Albemarle Sound's quota is getting cut by over 80%, and we're coming in over, and they're going double quota, It's an easy solution, especially when it's on the spawning grounds. And if it is the economy, we're talking about Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. The Albemarle Sound region includes Dare County, Currituck County, Camden County, Pasquotank County, Paquimins County, Washington County, Bertie, Terrell counties. All those counties, it's 6 months of the year. If you want to compare economies and we really add it all up, I think that the Albemarle Sound management area is economically impacted a lot more with what's going on. And finally, you know, the goal of the guides over there, and I have no problem with them fishing for it and catch and release, but you read on every Instagram, every website, Richard Andrews, who fishes over there all the time, who's a great fisherman, catches a lot of fish. I would bet you if you added up the posts that Richard Andrews does on Instagram, if you added up all the triple digit 100 plus fish days from him fishing there from January 1st to the end of May, he's dead discarding based on water temperature at a 6 to 10% mortality rate. There's 1,000 dead discards coming from one boat over there. And he's not the only one doing it, and I have no problem with him doing it. Well, when our quota gets cut by 80-some%, and there's 10 captains over there having 10,000 pounds of dead discards a year, or 10,000 dead discards a year, a season, at some point, are we ever going to address that? I guess that's all I have to say. I mean, at some point, that's got to be addressed when you're taking 80+% quota from ASMA. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Joey Van Dyke.
Can you hear me, Laura? He's not going to speak.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is Edward McFarland. Okay, it sounds like he is not. Okay, we're going to move on to Bill Gorham.
You hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm Bill Gorham, owner of Boat Up Lures. I'm also a legislative proxy on the Atlantic States Marine and Fisheries Commission. I had a lot of comments to make tonight, but I'd like to touch on some of the topics, Q&A, and discussions regarding the stocking and reference to if it's not managed for, this is the CSMA, managed for sustainable or self-sustainable fishery, that I guess the federal fundings would no longer fund it. And I would imagine that somebody would have to identify that and ask it to stop being funded. But I'd like to know if it ever was managed as a self-sustaining. Then two, if gill nets were allowed or continued to be allowed in its current location and ultimately moved above the ferry line, who or would it be deemed negative to the rockfish population by default, making it unsustainable? I think it's impeccable timing that we have this forced closure, a lockout of both sectors, and then it comes out that the stock isn't self-sustaining with any level of mortality. If there's one thing I've learned at the Atlantic States, is that those sitting there that do the catch and release stuff, if you think you're safe and you're going to play the game, you're next. And everybody needs to watch what they ask for. There's no doubt in my mind, if the rec sector, the wildlife, DMF, commercial sector, the resource, NGOs, all went to Raleigh and asked for the funding, we would probably get 10 times what we asked for, because it's 1,000 times return on investment for that put take fishery. It's a farce to think that we cannot get this funding and we have to do these draconian measures on what is and always has been a put-take fishery in the Central Southern. Now, I would fully support it if we didn't have our number one fishery for the recreational and at one time commercial southern flounder needing ultimately what will be a closure under the current FMP. And then we're putting pressure on speckled trout. We're putting pressure on actually concentrating effort on those species, wild stocks, when for the next 2 years, the next 3 years or 4 years, we could actually shift that effort to what has been and more likely always will be a put-take fishery as long as it's funded. I have the privilege to speak to many recreational fishermen, many tackle shops, and many of them are hurting and many of them are fed up. And it's, I think, I'm really thankful that the vast majority of recreational fishers and people in the industry don't know what I know, what's really going on. And it's awful and it's shameful. But to play along, the accountability measures, the pound for pound, without at least attempting a reporting app for the recreational sector, has been acknowledged in the most recent Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization. I know. I talked to congressmen that were on the House Resource Committee that was a part of those negotiations to get it passed. They know the pound MRIP was never meant for quota monitoring. I understand we have something for further inland. As far as an app goes, it's up to the industry, it's up to enforcement, and it's up to you better do this because it's the right thing to do. And people will report and we'll get better reporting. It's inexcusable at this time. Closures are the death sentence to a fishery, and it just fishery after fishery. We're in the same, cut the quota so low, it's absolutely going to fail, and then have a pound for pound payback that's going to really seal the deal to close it. I would say it's unbelievable, but it's very believable. So as far as the accountability measures, this AC, I wouldn't ever expect the MFC to follow anything that you do, but they may. But at least you have it on record of what you feel. And those people that hopefully will fight for what is fair and right, they can reference what you voted on. So the accountability measures, and this goes for the RRMA and the Albemarle Sound. If one sector goes over, it should not impact the other. Because what will happen is the RRMA can blow through it in 4 days. We saw it with Southern Flounder, and it will, by default, close the ASMA. I really don't think it's fair. If the TAL that's currently there, which is next to nothing overall, is required, I really don't see how we have directed catch release anything. As far as I was going to say to change the FMP goals to acknowledge that it's not a self-sustaining and ultimately make it a put take, but I guess if we do that, then we'll immediately lose the funding, and I don't think we'll get all the NGOs to go to Raleigh and ask for that unless gill nets are out. Finally, the topic of gill nets. I've God's honest truth tried to stay away from this topic as much as possible. I've always said the commercial sector, that's their fight to have. But unfortunately, as far as the recreational industry goes, their monies, their access, the impact on them is almost directly tied to whether gill nets are in the water or they're not in the water. And the only way to get them out of the water is to also deny our access. So I guess we're tied a hell of a lot more than anybody truly knows. The one thing I will say, if you remove both sectors out of those water systems in the Central Southern, and they don't produce a self-sustaining population, then we'll never get it back. So I really don't see the finger pointing to where we can point anything other than the recreational sector. So if that's the case, let's do everything we can to have a limited season. I'll go to Raleigh, wherever, and try to get the funding, any source funding. And I would think the wildlife would be on board for that, because the tax revenue, the experience, everything fishing, recreational fishing is supposed to be about justifies getting that funded and getting access back. Thank you, and I'm sure I'll probably get an earful after saying all this, but it needs to be said. At some point, enough is enough. Thank you.
And that concludes all the speakers that we had signed up tonight.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the speakers. We'll bring it back to the committee. And I think probably the best way to move forward is to go to your decision document. And we'll walk through the different management options, starting with Appendix 2, the Albemarle Roanoke Sustainable Harvest Issue Paper. And I assume that staff doesn't have anything relative to draft motions or anything they're going to present relative to the amendments or appendix.
That's
Is that
correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Appendix 2, Option 1, Sustainable Harvest. The Division and the Wildlife Resources Commission's recommendation is status quo to use of total allowable landings. Any comments or motions from the committee? Jim Rice?
Sarah, I've got a couple of comments, and I want to preface those by saying that I certainly respect our DMF staff and the others who have worked on this amendment, and I know their job is difficult. The goal of this amendment is expressly to manage the estuarine striped bass fisheries to achieve self-sustaining populations that provide sustainable harvest based on science-based decision-making processes. The Roanoke River striped bass population is the last remaining native, naturally reproducing population we've got left in North Carolina. We've had over 5 years of recruitment failure, and every metric for the population is trending dangerously low. And that, I look at all the recommendations, all the options in here are basically pretty much business as usual, coupled with hoping that our ever decreasing spawning biomass will eventually pull off some good recruitment years before it's too late. And I think we have to really ask ourselves whether or not we're willing to let this population go. We've lost the other ones. And basically, I think it's absurd to allow any harvest on this population right now. We need to eliminate every bit of mortality we can control until the stock recovers. And we need a few good years to do that. And then we can, turn it around and go back. But for now, we need a moratorium on harvest until we can see measurable improvement in the stock. And I will be making that motion.
So you're making the motion at this time to implement a moratorium?
I'll make the motion to establish a moratorium on all recreational and commercial harvest of striped bass in the RRMA and the ASMA until quantifiable measures of stock recovery have been met. And if we need to limit, that's the motion, but if we need to limit the impact of catch and release fishing on the spawning grounds, then, that's a tough one to do, but we may have to look at a limited entry fishery or something like that to accomplish that.
So we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second to the motion?
Sarah, could you just have Jim verify the motion is correct?
I said until quantifiable measures of stock recovery have been met.
Are you looking for a second?
That's correct.
Am I pushing my buttons correctly? This is Hacker, and I second that motion.
Sarah, if you're on, we can't hear you right now.
Where did I leave off?
We have a second on the floor.
Yes, we have a second by Carl Hacker. We will move forward with roll call vote.
No discussion on that? Anybody?
I'm sorry, I
I'll
asked that
discuss.
when I was muted, I guess. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah,
I
I'd
would
like
like
to
to
discuss
make a motion.
if you want.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Well, my discussion would be that I would like to do another motion after this, but that it didn't work. We've had years of it being closed in the Cape Fear River. It's not working. We've had now closure into 2019 since the Neuse River. It's not working. I don't see where it's effective option to shut us all down from harvesting striped bass when the science is showing that it's not effective measure.
Well, Jamie, the difference is that the Roanoke River has a really good naturally sustained, naturally reproducing population, and that it has recovered before when we've really cut back. Now we're looking at more bad years in a row than we had the last time around. We need to cut back more, and it should bounce back, but it's not going to bounce back until we get some good recruitment years. And right now, we're eating our seed corn. You know, we keep harvesting on this population until we get, before we get some spawning. Those fish can't come back and spawn next year or the year after, which stripers, they live to be 30 years if you let them. So that's a big difference. And, the other two rivers, it's been forever since they've had a naturally reproducing, self-sustaining population. I don't want to see that happen to the Roanoke.
But what happens when you do this is the catch and release fishermen still go out there and is 6.4% or more. That's on the low end of how many are dying just so that they can have a hobby. And what they do is completely cut out the commercial sector from so many fisheries at the expense because there's a striped bass issue. We just lost our shad season because of striped bass. We lost the Neuse River because of striped bass, but the striped bass aren't going to recover because the recreation fishermen have taken them all and indiscriminately hooking and killing. And I don't have anything against recreation fishermen. I wish they could keep some of these fish so they wouldn't do it repeatedly all the time. But we stay within our parameters. We're under our parameters or barely over in very few years. And the RMA, evidence showed it more than doubled. And that's just what we say they caught. There's no actual accountability for how many total fish, how many pounds were caught. And until there is, I feel like this is all a waste because we don't know what's getting taken. So we don't know if there's a good population.
Well, like I said, it may take a limited entry or, a lottery limited entry or something like that to cut that catch and release mortality because it is significant. You're absolutely right.
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the motion, and the Albemarle Sound Management Area hasn't had any issue. They've been under harvesting. They have a 6-month season. They've been very responsible with their quota. The problem I see in the upper Roanoke River management area where you've got all the pressure on the spawning grounds. It's not the harvest that's killing these fish, it's the dead discards. And like the biologists have said, this is the only place where we have a wild population of spawning striped bass. Why are we having 100, 200 boats sitting on top of them and welding, just whacking and whacking and whacking these fish? If we're having a problem and worried about these fish spawning, put a 2-year moratorium on having people in the water in the upper Roanoke River, and you will see a lot more fish swim out of the river alive. And that will have the biggest impact on the Albemarle Roanoke fisheries.
If nothing else, put a moratorium on it during the spawning season. That's where all your females are going to spawn. You stop that fishery from happening during spawning season, you'll have more fish coming back.
Yeah, I agree. I would support this motion if it was to close the upper Roanoke, but I can't support this motion to close the whole area. That's not the ones causing the problem.
Well, the reason I said the whole area, I mean, I concur with you about the impact on the upper river. The reason I said the whole area is because of the situation we're in. And all those fish are the same population. So right now, it doesn't matter if we kill a fish down in the sound or up in the river. But we got to get this population recovered. And I could easily see going forward where a moratorium or restrictions closure on the spawning grounds are part of the long-term stability of the system. But right now we've got ourselves in such a hole because we've been doing half measures that it's too serious, I think, right now to not close the whole thing.
I don't think it's we. I think it's the WRC that's has got us in this hole by allowing this catch on the upper Roanoke River. I don't think it's we. I think it's WRC.
Well, we being, I mean, all of us, but they're going to have to come around if that's what it takes.
I'd like to make a motion to put a moratorium on the RRMA, mostly the Roanoke Rapids area, Weldon area, to not allow any catch and release or fishing during spawning season.
I would second that motion.
Well, we got a motion on the floor. We need to take action on that unless you're doing an amendment to the motion or a substitute motion. Are you moving to substitute with your motion, Ray?
Yes.
I don't
Can you
know.
repeat that motion?
Sarah, do I have to agree to that for it to go forward or not?
Not relative to a substitute, no.
Okay.
But if any of you folks are true Robert's rules, tell me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
Yeah, it'd be the other way for an amendment.
Mr. Pugh, can you repeat your motion, please?
To shut down all fishing on the in the RRMA during spawning season.
Ray, you'd be better off to state the months.
Which would be, I believe, what is it? March and April.
And May.
And May. I'm trying to find where that page is.
So, excuse me, this is Charlton. So the spawning period would be, technically it's usually the last couple of weeks of April to, the first few weeks of May. But
okay. I'm sorry. I was trying to find that. If you can clarify that.
Can the, Mr. Pugh, can you just confirm that that's the motion?
Yes, that's correct.
And Jamie, did you second that?
Yes, ma'am.
Any discussion on this substitute motion? What'll happen, we'll take the vote on the substitute motion. If it passes, it'll become the main motion. If it fails, Jim's motion will be the one we'll vote on.
Can I speak, Madam Chair?
Yes, Thomas, is that you?
Yes, ma'am. Thomas Newman. Isn't there already technically a moratorium on the Roanoke River management area? You know, aside from the 4 days that they can fish. I mean, you can only keep fish the 4 days of the season this year.
It is on harvest. It is on harvest, but not catch and release.
That's right. I think catch and release is the big elephant in the room. I just feel like this motion needs to address that.
Keith Bruno, Ray, is your motion for all fishing or just retaining?
Yes,
So
all
I think
fishing.
so it's a
Catch-
moratorium on
catch and release.
fishing.
Catch and release.
Thank you, Ray.
So nobody can fish for any kind of fish in the Roanoke River during those months.
Should I don't know how to target. Should I put targeting striped bass? I mean, that'll leave it kind of open because they can say, oh, well, I'm fishing for trout, but oh, I'm catching striped bass by accident. So, I mean, I would think you'd have to put it on all fishing.
You can't regulate what bites the hook.
That's right. So I would say all fishing. I mean, I know that's not going to make a lot of people
largemouth
happy.
bass. I can tell all those largemouth bass anglers in the lower river in the spring, they can't fish. Or
you got catfish tournaments, you got largemouth tournaments.
Well,
you could limit it like from Big Rock up to, one of the bridges above the rapids or something like that. But
I don't fish in that area, so I'm not familiar with it. But I mean, just looking at the numbers, that's where it seems the problem lies. So I guess if you shut all fishing down, that's going to be a problem. So I guess targeting striped bass, I'm not really sure how you would word it.
no.
You could potentially do it if you're looking at specifically for that area above 258 bridge to the dam.
I guess white bass, and then I mean,
This is why I didn't put that in my motion, because it would be an enforcement impossibility. That's why you'd have to go to something like a limited entry fishery where people would have to put in for a lottery and get a tag to put on their boat to fish on that part of the river. That sort of thing.
Any suggestions, or Ray, are you happy with this motion as written? He's gone.
It's better. there and fish for.
I'm not exactly sure what you said a minute ago. You were breaking up on my end anyway.
Okay.
Mr. Pugh, if you'd like, you can type your comments into the chat box, and we might be able to read those. Sarah, it looks like we may have lost Mr. Pugh.
Okay. Any comments or discussion on the substitute motion? Jamie, your hand's up. Is that you wish to make comment?
I just forgot it was up, but since you called on me, for the Neuse River, when they closed it up to the ferry lines, they indiscriminately just closed and said no nuts. So there's no chance that interacting with striped bass. So perhaps we should keep it as a no catch and release as the moratorium. So that way there's no chance of a striped bass interaction, since that would be the most effective way to protect the RRMA area.
Jim, your hand's up. Did you have comment? Okay. I guess we haven't gotten Ray back.
It does not appear so. We are trying to call him to see if we can get him back up and running. And Mr. Pugh, if you do come back on, please feel free to shout out.
I hate to move forward with his motion when it sounded like he had some more comments.
Madam Chair, if you'd like, we could take a break for a few minutes and come back. We have him on the phone.
All right, let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
We'll come back at 8:11.
Hello?
Okay, now, Mr. Pugh, if you were on the phone, we unmuted you.
Okay, thank you. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mr. Pugh. You're just a little bit low, so if you can just make sure to project your voice a little, that way we could hear you a little bit better.
All right. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that was a little bit better.
Okay. I'm
Okay,
almost yelling now.
We'll reconvene. It's 8:11 and Ray is back on the line.
Okay, and just so Mr. Pugh knows, to raise his hand on the phone, he can hit *3, and then *3 again would lower his hand.
Thank you.
Was there any further discussion on the substitute motion? Seeing no discussion, we'll call for the vote. Roll call vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake. Everett Blake. I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Blake. Keith Bruno. Keith Bruno. Keith Bruno. Nay. Alyssa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Herman Dunbar. Is he absent? He's absent. Carl Hacker. Carl Hacker.
Nay, do you copy?
I do. Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh. Raymond Pugh. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Pugh. Okay, he's gone again. Jim Rice.
Nay.
Thank you. Roger Rolifson. Oh, absent. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Nay.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh. I'm not hearing from Mr. Pugh.
Didn't ever hear from Everett either.
And Everett is a nay as well.
Thank you, Everett. Mr. Pugh, if you could put it in the chat. Okay, Sarah, I don't hear from him, and we're trying to figure out if he's going to be able to participate.
Okay, so it would appear to me, even if he votes in favor of his motion, the motion would fail.
Mm-hmm.
So the main motion comes back up as the primary motion now, which is the motion that Dr. Rice made. So the motion was to establish a moratorium on all harvest of striped bass in the RRMA and ASMA until quantifiable measures of stock recovery have been met. It was seconded. Any discussion on the main motion? I see no hands.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is this Mr. Pugh?
Yay! Gotta love technology.
So that was on the substitute motion. Ray Pugh voted aye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're back to the main motion. The motion failed, Ray. We're back to the main motion to establish a moratorium on all harvests of striped bass in RRMA and ASMA until quantifiable measures of stock recovery have been met. There was no discussion, so we'll move to the roll call vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Nay.
Thank you. Keith Bruno.
I have a deep respect for everything that Brother Jim says. Jim Rice is a very wise person and very understanding of all things fish. And it's a hard decision for me to come to vote against this, but I say nay.
Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Nay.
Thank you. Herman Dunbar. He's absent. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Nay.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Nay.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Nay.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Nay. The motion fails, but I'm not seeing the votes on the screen. There we go. 2-7 and 2 absent. So unless there's another motion, that takes care of the sustainable harvest issue paper. And we will move into the next issue paper relative to the commercial fishery managed by a bycatch fishery. The division and the Wildlife Resources Commission recommendation was for status quo to continue to maintain as a bycatch fishery. The other option was to end a bycatch fishery. I would entertain a motion relative to this option too.
I would like to make a motion to continue the striped bass as a bycatch fishery. Jamie Winslow.
Have a motion
Thomas
by
Newman.
motion by Jamie Winslow to continue status quo and continue as a bycatch fishery. Have a second by Thomas Newman. Any discussion on the motion? I see no hands. Last call for any discussion. Seeing no hands, we'll move to the vote.
Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker. Carl Hacker.
Aye. Do you copy?
Yes, thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Nay.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving,
Madam Chair, while they're finishing this up, this is Charlton. May I make a quick recommendation to the committee?
yes, sir.
When Nathaniel shows the next options back there, if there's an option that suits your motion, maybe it might be just more efficient to just give the number, 2A or B or 3A, B, C. And if you want to make something that's not already up there, then please feel free, but it would just make it go a little more smoothly if there's an option up there that you like to just use that number letter combination.
So in that motion, we could say, commercial fishery 2A.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Moving on to accountability measures. The 4 options with the TAL by 10%, TAL by 5%, landings exceed their allocation, TAL by 5%, and the division and the Wildlife Commission's I think it's the division's recommendation. If the landings in any fishery exceeds their allocated TAL, any landings in excess of the TAL would be deducted the next year. Would entertain a motion.
Clarification on the handout, it says it will be deducted from that fisheries allocation. It's a little bit different in the handout I printed. Be deducted from that fisheries the next year. It is specific
To
where
my
it was the
understanding,
relevant for the algae.
it would be deducted from whatever fishery was in excess of their TAL.
Yes, ma'am. That's how it reads on the handout I was sent in the email.
Or the decision document
yes.
may be just slightly different, but that's the intent. Yes.
Okay.
If any particular fishery exceeds their particular allocated TAL, the other options A and B is the total TAL for all fisheries combined.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yes, sir. I just want to clarify that on that motion because it was different on the decision document.
Yeah, the language in the decision document is slightly different than in the FMP.
Thank you.
So Thomas, are you making a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to accept option D.
D.
Yeah, I'll second that. Missy Clark.
Missy Clark with a second. So that would be 3D.
D.
Not
D.
B. D.
Sorry. And Missy was the one that.
Yeah.
Any discussion on the motion? I guess I have a question to Charlton. 3D will be, even though the wording is a little bit different, we need to specify it by the fishery that goes over. Is specific to that fishery or not?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is specific to that fishery, each individual fishery in each sector. So we have 3 fisheries and sectors, and each one will have their own TAL. And option 3D is any one of those go over their specific TAL, it comes off their specific TAL the next year and doesn't affect any other fisheries TAL.
But we don't need to specify that in the motion, even though the wording in the decision document's a little different, as Thomas pointed out.
So I'm just looking for the word in 1 second in the FMP. That decision document is kind of to guide it. If y'all would like to add that in your motion, you certainly can. I was trying to look at the exact language in the FMP right quick.
Well, it sounded like to me from the motion that we wanted to make sure it was specified it was for the fishery that, specifically for the fishery that went over. And I didn't, I think that's what the motion and the seconder was talking about.
Yes, ma'am. So that is that in the FMP, it does say that specific, that TAL will be deducted from that fisheries allocated TAL the next calendar year.
Okay.
So if you vote, if the committee wishes to vote for option 3D, as it is written in the FMP, they can just simply say 3D, and it does. The wording is any landings in excess of that allocated TAL will be deducted from that fisheries allocated TAL the next calendar year.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion by the committee? Seeing no hands, we'll go to the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno.
Aye.
Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker. Carl Hacker.
I keep pushing the wrong button. Aye, copy.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes. I think it was all in favor. Moving on to the next item is the option 4, size limits to expand age structure. Status quo, increase minimum size. ASMA, implement 18 to 25 inch harvest slot. Roanoke River Management Area, maintain 18 to 22 with one fish over 40. Roanoke River Management Area, maintain slot 18 to 22 and no fish greater. Division's recommendations for ASMA 18 to 25. WRC's Roanoke River Management Area 18 to 22, no fish greater. Would entertain a motion relative to option 4.
I'd like to make a motion for 4E.
It was Raymond.
Is that Ray Pugh?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're just recommending relative to the Roanoke River Management Area and not the ASMA?
Correct.
So Madam Chair, this is Trolton again. So we kind of need somewhere we need a motion to address the Albemarle Sign Management Area as well. If you can still see your screens, the division did recommend option 4C, which is the 18 to 25 inch harvest slot in the ASMA, and then as Mr. Pugh made the motion to support E, which is also what the Wildlife Commission's staff supported. So I didn't know if maybe Mr. Pugh
yes.
meant to
Okay,
do that or accidental.
That's correct.
So,
4C and E, I'm sorry.
I think Ray's motion is to support option 4, C, and E.
And E, correct.
Is there a second to the motion? Jim Rice?
I did not mean to second that. I was getting ready to raise my hand on the comment, Sarah.
I'll second it. Thomas Newman.
Have a second by Thomas. Discussion on the motion. Jim, I assume that's what you were going to make comment on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I've already made it clear I don't think we should be allowing any harvests right now, but I like the fact that in for E, we're getting rid of the no fish greater part. Those big fish are really, really, really valuable spawners, and we shouldn't be killing those fish. In the ASMA, if I was doing this, I would make it an 18 to 22 inch slot, just like upriver. Those 25-inch fish are just starting to become much, much more valuable as spawners, and it just doesn't make sense to me to kill them right when they're coming into their own.
Thank you, Jim. I'll ask Charlton a question relative to the motion. The percentage of in the recreational harvest and ASMA, the percentage of fish 22 to 25 or 23 to 25. What kind of percentage overall would you be looking in the harvest?
So what is the percentage of harvest in the recreational sector of 22 to 25 inch fish? Was that the question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah. If y'all do have your FMP document on page 68, we have those plots that show what the harvest is. So the, I would say 90 to 95% of the harvest in the recreational sector is between 18 and 22, 23 inches. Well, maybe 24 inches, and it changes some through the years. But the majority of it is less than 22 inches. The biggest savings with that 18 to 24, and Dr. Rice, this is why we looked at that. So we looked at if you're going to continue to operate the gillnet fisheries that operate for southern flounder and American shad, the majority of the striped bass that are caught in those fisheries are less than 25 inches, 18 to 25 inches, maybe really 19 to 25 inches. So, we kind of matched we didn't want to increase the dead discards, but so much with having to throw back all of those fish that we know that gear is going to catch. So you are right. Once fish get 25 or 26 inches, that's when their fecundity really increases the number of eggs they produce. So that's also kind of why we stopped it there. As you know, the younger females, by about 19 inches, majority of females in the AR stock are mature, but of course they're not producing nearly the number of eggs and the quality of eggs that those fish are producing when they start getting 25, 26, 27 inches. So, while that might not still be, but maybe 10 or 12%, maybe 15% of the fish are going to be above 25 inches in that commercial harvest. Over time, that is certainly going to add up. And once those fish are protected, as you pointed out, they're going to be just producing more eggs and are valuable. So that's kind of why we decided on the 18 to 25 inch in the Albemarle Sign management area.
So
if that helps answer the question any.
So this size limit restriction essentially is commercial and rec. And essentially, except for the small amount of striped bass that occurs in the flounder fishery and the limited amount that occurs in the shad fishery, pretty much it should curtail any larger fish discards, because I mean those two fisheries, except for the shad, flounder is pretty minimal because 48-inch tie down and everything. So really, you're gonna lock in commercial and rec at that size limit.
Yes, ma'am. The rec sector does harvest some, certainly some fish over 25 inches. You'll really see that when we have a big year class. And those fish get 6 and 7 and 8 years old. There's more of them. You will see the catch of larger fish increase. But yes, we just for ease of regulation and ease of just enforcement and confusion among the public, we decided the 18 to 25 would work for both the recreational and commercial sectors. And of course, we all also have the TAL in place. So this is not like this is the only management measure that we have to try to make sure we're not over harvesting. We have our TAL. This is just going to really focus on, over time, increasing the abundance of those old fish in the population. As Dr. Rice stated, striped bass can get 31 years of age. We saw one 31 years old from a few years ago. So we'd certainly like to see more of those larger fish in the population.
Thank you, Charlton. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Ready for the roll call vote?
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake,
Actually, do me a favor, read out exactly what C and E again, one more time.
of course. So 4 is size limits to expand the age structure of the stock. C is in ASMA, implement an 18 to 25 inch harvest slot. And E is in the RRMA to maintain the slot limit 18 to 22 inch and no larger fish.
Okay. And my vote is nay.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank
Aye.
you. Thomas Newman. Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Roger Rolifson. Sorry, he's absent. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. And Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on to gear modifications and area closures to reduce discard mortality.
Actually, Sarah, she may want to check. She has Jim Rice is absent, not Roger.
Yep. I think it's taking a while for the votes to catch up on the screen.
All right, perfect.
Okay, on to the gear modifications option. The A status quo to continue commercial harvest of striped bass with gill nets and recreational harvest and catch and release fishing in ASMA and Roanoke River Management Area, including the spawning grounds, and implement a requirement to use non-offset barbless circle hooks when fishing with live or natural bait in the inland waters of the Roanoke River upstream of Highway 258 bridge, May 1st through June 30th, were the recommendations of the division and the Wildlife Resources Commission. Would entertain a motion relative to gear modifications and area closures. Any committee member willing to make a motion?
Thomas Newman, I'll make a motion to accept E.
But not A?
I'm sorry, A and E.
Have a motion by Thomas Newman relative to with option 5, A and E, not D. And I think it was seconded by Jamie Winslow. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands, we'll go to the vote.
Everett Blake.
Nay.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Nay.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Okay.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on to number 6, adaptive management. Provides a flexibility used to adjust seasons, area closures, possession limits, adjust the TAL based on the stock assessments. The division and the Wildlife Resources Commission endorsed and supported all 4 of these. So would entertain a motion relative to adaptive management.
And Madam Chair, if I may just interject one more quick second before the motion is made. So these are just some of the examples of the adaptive management that has traditionally been used. So the committee does not necessarily have to, adopt those specific ones. They can just adopt adaptive management. And if they choose to make a different motion, that's fine. But I think the division and the Wildlife Commission just supported adaptive management in general as a tool to do the things we need to do, with these being some of the options. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlton. Entertain a motion.
Thomas Newman, I'll make a motion to adopt adaptive measurement, adopt adaptive management.
Have a motion by Thomas Newman to adopt adaptive management. Is there a second?
Missy Clark, aye. I agree.
Have a second by Missy Clark. Discussion
It's me.
on adaptive management motion.
It's Keith. I've just got a feeling that this might be a way around this whole show right here. I do realize that there are some times the division needs to act somewhat quickly, but it gives you all a lot of power to do things without consulting me. And I say that in jest, but that's, that is the feeling that I get from this adaptive management bunch that we've got up here. So the system we have in place is by no means perfect. I often find lots of fault with it. I think this would make it worse, in my opinion. The adaptive management is great when it works in my favor and not so great when I disagree. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Thank you, Keith. Any other comments relative to the motion? I'll just make a couple of comments that I support the motion and adaptive management, because there's so many times that it's certainly been beneficial to the fishery, whether it be recreational or commercial, because so many other times, because we do have proclamation authority, that we can take action instead of having to go through the long process relative to trying to do something through a fishery management plan. So I support the motion. Any other comments relative to the motion? Seeing no hands, we'll call the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
That concludes the sections relative to the AR stock. We'll move to Appendix 3, which is the Tarpamico and Neuse River Sustainable Harvest. The management options relative to striped bass harvest. I'll let you catch up. A, continue no harvest possession measure. B, in no possession measure. Division and Wildlife Commission's recommendation is A, continue no possession measure. Would entertain a motion.
This is Keith again. I'd like to make a motion to end the no possession measure.
Have a motion by Keith Bruno for 1B, which is in no possession measure. Is there a second?
Thomas Newman, I'll second it.
Have a second by Thomas Newman. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I was a little bit torn on this one, but I mean, being the division and WRC is seeing that this staff is not self-populating. Why not catch them? Put them in the water and let us catch them.
Any other comments relative to the motion?
Well, I mean, I will say that is the $1 million question. If you're going to create a put take fishery, do we need to look at a number, a limit? I mean, what are we going to do here? Is it just like, hey, we're going to drop 100,000 fish so we get 100,000? Are we going to do anything to control that fishery? And it'd be probably similar, very similar to here and the Cape Fear as well.
Jim?
Sorry.
Sarah, I just would toss in a comment. You know, you look at where we are, and that's the case. We don't have the natural reproduction, but I will say this: you can't get apples until you have apple trees, and we have not succeeded in getting large mature adults in those river systems in sufficient numbers to really find out if we could have a self-sustaining population. We're not going to have a native Tar River or Neuse River population anymore because we just know that they're all gone. So it's kind of a toss-up between, well, do you want to have one that's naturally reproducing and you don't have to keep stocking anymore, in which case we can still try to get them, or do you give up on that and just go to stocking?
Thank you, Jim. Any other comments relative to the motion?
I mean, Jim, I think your point is actually pretty good there. I mean, if we go to that kind of a put take fishery, do we try to stock a larger fish that may be more sustainable?
It's not unless you're going to stock 8-pounders. I mean, the harvest rate on catchable size fish when we have harvest, it's like over 50% once they hit legal size. So you've got to have enough fish survive to become big and be successful spawners. They're not even very good at it the first few years they spawn. So they've got to get big. And so you just got to let them live in the system long enough to do that. And until that happened, if you get to that point and you still don't get good natural reproduction, then there's something else wrong in the system and forget it. But it is a big effort. I mean, but we've been taking a 5-foot jump at a 10-foot fence for a couple of decades, and we either need to quit jumping or jump higher.
Well, I think too, one of the things with really with those three systems, are never going to get the environment and the habitat right to have a successful spawn because of the flow, because of whether it be the dams on the Cape Fear that are blocking, the upstream reaches, whether you've got adequate flow like Roanoke, but there are a lot of environmental issues that have never been addressed in those systems.
One other thing to keep in mind is, as I said, we have lost any native populations that existed in those rivers. And so if we were to ever to get those environmental issues dealt with at any time in the future, you could still try to get a naturally reproducing population based on stocking. And until then, you could just do a put, grow, and take based on stocking. We've passed the fork in the road of trying to save a natural population in those rivers.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Thomas.
Just
Oh,
a second, Thomas.
okay, I can't see any hands.
Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead, Jamie.
I was just gonna say, if the recommendation is to end no possession, would that then reopen the noose to everybody? All parties would be back allowed in the noose?
Can you restate that question, please? Thank you.
If we went with the no possession measure for striped bass, would that then bring it back available to nets to be in the noose, since the whole reason it was closed was for striped bass? But if you allowed a harvest of striped bass there, could then the nets come back?
This is Todd. Those are, really two kind of separate issues, the no possession measure and then the closure of the ferry line with the gill nets. So just because you would say maybe end the no possession measure, that wouldn't necessarily mean that gill nets were allowed above the ferry lines.
Unless you go back to some type of restrictive total allowable landings.
And then the next option that you're voting on would be the gill net measures.
Jamie, did you have another question?
I just wasn't sure because, B and C were removed, and so there's only one option under 2. So I didn't know if we could circumvent that they took our other 2 options away and put it back on the table for a vote by saying to end no possession measure and reopen to gill nets above the ferry lines.
So, Sarah, this is Laura Levansky. I think I can clarify that if it's okay.
Yep, go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. So, Jamie, the options that are in the plan currently are what's listed. So it's 1A and B, and then 2A. You, as an advisor, of course, can recommend any measure that you would like to the commission. So, for example, I think you gave the option of in the no possession measure and open the open gill nets above the ferry lines. You, of course, could make that motion, if you so desire.
Okay, thank you.
Thomas, we'll go back to you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, they've been stocking these fish in Weldon since the late 1800s. We've been putting in phase 2 fish since the late 60s and the late 70s in the lower rivers. If y'all charge $5 for somebody to have a striped bass on their boat, everybody would pay it. All the money would go directly to the hatcheries. And everything's solved. I mean, $300,000 to stock 300,000 fish is a hell of a deal. You know, let us catch some fish, put fish in the water and let us catch them.
Madam Chair, this is Steve Poland again.
Go ahead,
If I may,
Steve.
can I just thank you? So this isn't to, support or discount the idea of, fees to support stocking. It's just that license fees, that's the responsibility of the legislature. The Marine Fisheries Commission can't take action to increase those fees. Certainly the Marine Fisheries Commission could support that notion, but they don't have the authority to modify the license fees. So just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, I know as a commercial fisherman, we have to have extra endorsements for certain activities we do. And I know they currently do not charge, but I mean, the division could set up an endorsement and then petition to legislation to put a fee along with that endorsement, correct? I mean, I'm not trying to start a new fishery, but I'm just saying this is be a cheap fishery to pay for.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand. I just wanted to make clear that it would take legislative action to add a new license fee to commercial or recreational licenses, either one. So,
yeah, thank you, Steve.
And I just want to say, nobody is suggesting a free-for-all here, just go out and catch the fish. We still need, seasons and size limits and towels and, go back to some version of what we had before this moratorium. Definitely not suggesting a wide open, rodeo type fishery.
Thank you, Keith. Any other discussion? Jamie, your hand's still up. Is that a leftover?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. Seeing no further hands, we'll call the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake,
Aye.
thank you. Keith Bruno, thank you. Melissa Clark,
Aye.
thank you. Carl Hacker,
Aye.
thank you. Thomas Newman,
Aye.
thank you. Raymond Pugh,
Hey,
thank you. Jim Rice,
Abstain.
thank you. Jamie Winslow,
Aye.
thank you. And Sarah Winslow,
Nay.
thank you.
Okay, moving ahead to the gillnet restrictions or limits. Option, management option 2. One option, maintain gillnet closure above the ferry lines. We've had quite a bit of discussion on that already. Would entertain a motion. Jamie, I see your hands up.
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to make a motion that we end the gillnet closure above the ferry lines.
Have a motion by Jamie Winslow relative to gillnet restrictions 2A to end the gillnet closure above the ferry lines. Is there a second to the motion?
Keith Bruno, I'll second it. And I think we somehow need to address a small mesh, large mesh, flounder. There's so much wrapped up in this. I'm afraid if we just, no matter how strongly we can send the message to the MFC that we support an opening for gill nets above the ferry line, that's not giving them enough guidance to say, okay, let's do it. You know, they're just going to have this vision. And I really believe we have some very true dislike for nets in the current commission, and they're just, you know, out of hand without any thought process at all. They're going to say no. I believe we have to find some way to allow at a very minimum a small net, strike net fishery, and possibly a set net bait type fishery above these ferry lines. Whether, no matter what happens with striped bass, we really, as commercial fishermen, we need to get this area back. It was very productive, and catching just something as simple as catching jumping mullets for bait for the sport fish industry all summer. It was that's where it was at, you know. So it's important. It's important to us, and whether they know it or not, it's important to the recreational sector.
So Keith, a question to you: is there anything that we could do relative to the motion, as in, like the 50-yard distance or the 200-yard distance, that would allow some fisheries in those areas to be prosecuted, but essentially not totally open up everything?
Well, we can easily go back to the 2019 measures to where we had tie downs, and really that's not even an issue anymore, because with the incredibly limited flounder season, there's no, you know, there's no interaction there because there's no large mesh, because there's no flounder. So a lot of this stuff that gets brought up, you know, oh, we're going to interact with this fishery. These fisheries have already been taken away. We really need to get something. Yeah, I fish spots up there at times. Again, guys love them for tarpon bait. They come to my dock all the time to buy spots. So even at a minimum, we've got to say, you know, back to the 2019 laws that were in place to protect the stripers. I think that would be a place to start. You know, maybe our help on the Marine Fisheries Commission, the guys who are like-minded, can tweak that a little bit and run with that and try and convince the ones that are not like-minded. But we definitely have to get this before them and tell them how important it is.
I agree with you, though, that I think it's really down to not, it might not go anywhere. That I think you're right. I mean, there's going to have to be some kind of stipulations in there for it to have a chance to get through the commission.
Is it too late for a friendly amendment?
No, sir. If it's so agreeable to the motion maker and the seconder.
Good with me.
Me too.
Go ahead with
Yeah,
the friend.
I would do a friendly amendment of ask the MFC to end the gillnet closure upstream of the ferry lines and continue the current tie-down restrictions, setback restrictions, and attendance requirements from DMF.
Madam Chair, this is Charlton again. Could I just maybe?
Go ahead, Charlton.
Yeah, MFC to end the gillnet closure above the ferry lines and continue tie-down requirements, setback from shore requirements, and attendance requirements, etc., as issued by the NCDMF.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, just, I think I understand what Mr. Bruno and Newman are trying to do, and it may be cleaner if we just, could you go back just real quick to the slide with the motion? So I think y'all just want to make sure that they don't think it's just to open up gillnet fisheries to anything. We had tons of gillnet regulations for small mesh nets, large mesh nets, distance from shore, different time of the year. It would take 5 hours to write all those down. If your intent is to go back to just all of the gillnet regulations that had been put in place through all of the FMPs prior to that 2019 closure, then I would just recommend maybe amending your motion just to say to open it back up with all of the previous gillnet regulations in place, because a lot of those are in the restrictions, rules, regulations that were in place before that gillnet closure above the ferry lines. And I think that's getting to what y'all were trying to.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd say all previous DMF regulations prior to 2019, March 2019.
So, Jamie, Keith, and Thomas, does that address your issues relative to the motion? And Jamie and Keith, are you agreeable to the friendly amendment?
Yes.
Very agreeable.
Yes.
Okay. Comments relative to the motion? Jamie, you have a comment?
No, I forgot about the hand.
That's okay. Comments relative to the proposed motion? Seeing no hands, we'll go for the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Nay.
Thank you. Keith Bruno.
Aye.
Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Abstain.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
The next issue is number 3, relative to adaptive management. And it's kind of like Charlton pointed out before, that adaptive management covers a host of possible issues or means to manage. Both agencies recommended moving forward with adaptive management. Would entertain a motion relative to this action. Anyone willing to make a motion?
Thomas Newman, I'll make a motion to adopt adaptive management.
Have a motion by Thomas Newman, and that would be management options number 3, adaptive management. Jim Rice.
I'll second that.
Have a second by Dr. Rice. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote.
Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno.
Nay.
Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. And Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on to Appendix 4, Cape Fear River Sustainable Harvest. The management options: maintain no possession provision, seasonal harvest in the Cape Fear River, seasonal harvest in joint and inland waters above 140 bridge, seasonal harvest in inland fishing waters on the main stem of the Cape Fear River, and adaptive management. Number 1 is recommended by both agencies to maintain no possession provision. Would entertain a motion relative to the possession limit.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. May I just make a real quick correction? The division recommends maintaining the no possession provision. The Wildlife Resources Commission was wanting to have seasonal harvest in the Cape Fear River.
Okay, thanks, Charlton. Jim Rice.
Given that there has been a little evidence of natural reproduction in the Cape Fear, and they've just made some more changes to the fish passage way, I'm not ready to throw this this population under the bus yet. So I would make a motion to support option 1.
Thank you, Jim. Have a motion by Dr. Rice to maintain no possession limit. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
I think that was Ray, wasn't it?
Correct.
Second by Raymond Pugh. Any discussion?
Do we need to pick multiple here again?
Sarah, I was going to say, if Dr. Rice would be willing, should we not go with 1 and 5? Since the adaptive measure, we voted on it for all the other ones, it would be the perfect time to lump the two together.
I would.
And Madam Chair, I'm sorry again, I can't raise my hand to interrupt politely, but I did want to clarify again that was exactly what the both the Wildlife Commission and the division did both support the adaptive management. So I apologize, I didn't get that a while ago.
And I would accept that friendly amendment. Sure.
Okay, so option 1 and option 5, which is adaptive management. Ray,
I would second that. I would second
that. Okay. Jim, you've got your hand up. Any discussion on the motion? Just one question relative to clarification. This includes Northeast Cape Fear, Black, Brunswick, all the systems, correct?
The Cape Fear system.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Northeast Cape Fear, Black River, Brunswick River.
Yes.
Everything that flows into the Cape Fear.
Yes, ma'am.
Any discussion? Seeing no hands, we'll call for the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno. Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Abstain.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Aye.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. And Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Next is Appendix 5, hook and line as a commercial gear. The options and recommended are do not allow hook and line as a commercial gear for estuarine striped bass, and then the adaptive management process. Both recommended by both agencies. Would entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion not to allow hook and line as commercial gear for estuarine striped bass.
And who was that?
Sorry, that was Keith.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Is there a second to the motion? I'll let the division catch up too.
Thomas Newman, I'll second it.
Have a second by Thomas. I know adaptive management was part of this, but I know Keith ain't gonna put that in his motion. Any discussion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Yes, Chair. Everett Blake.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Bruno.
Aye.
Thank you. Melissa Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. Carl Hacker.
Aye.
Thank you. Thomas Newman.
Aye.
Thank you. Raymond Pugh.
Nay.
Thank you. Jim Rice.
Aye.
Thank you. Jamie Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you. Sarah Winslow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Also, under this option, the recommendation relative to adaptive management, if anyone is willing to make a motion relative to that recommendation by the division and the commission.
This is Jim Rice. I will make that motion. Sorry, Keith.
Have a motion by Jim Rice to support adaptive management. Is there a second?
Thomas Newman, second.
Have a second by Thomas Newman. Any discussion?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This is Keith again. If we just kind of voted that there shouldn't be a hook and line fishery, where does the adaptive management come in for this non-existent hook and line fishery? Why would we have adaptive management on something we don't want? Kind of seems counterintuitive.
Response by the division?
Is that where we're at? Is that with this particular adaptive management is with that hook and line fishery that we just kind of shot down?
So technically, in the FMP, the adaptive management only applies if you were to have voted to allow hook and line as a commercial gear. And then because there are a couple of issues with, reporting requirements in the ASMA, we had some adaptive management that we would have needed to implement if, things had not gone as we had planned, if it were allowed. But I think you may be right. They are all associated with if we had suggested to allow hook and line as a commercial gear. So it's not really needed.
So this is kind of mute right here.
I believe it is kind of a moot point for this one, but because the committee voted to
against the hook and line gear.
Right.
All right. So where do we go from here?
I made
So in this aspect, it's only relative, that adaptive management is only relative to that hook and line issue.
And Sarah, if my second will approve, then I'll withdraw the motion in light of Keith's wisdom and insight there.
Yeah, I redact my second. I thought we were still on Cape Fear River.
Okay, we have the seconder and the motion maker have withdrawn their motion. So it's, null and void. So that concludes the options relative to Estuarine Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan. Is there anything else relative to that plan that the committee needs to take action on? I'm asking the division.
No, I think we're good, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Then we will move to the Marine Fisheries Commission update from Laura. Jim,
Thank you,
did you
Madam
have a
Chair.
question? Excuse me, Laura. Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to know why I can't see when my dang hand's up by accident. It doesn't show up
Okay,
on the
Laura.
screen.
Okay. All right, so I'll try to get through this quickly. So as you are all well aware, at the February meeting, the Marine Fishery Commission approved the draft Amendment 2 to the Estuarine Striped Bass FMP without the gillnet restrictions, option 2B and 2C in the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse River Sustainable Harvest issue paper. And they approved that plan for public and AC review. So we did hold a listening session on March 9th, so last Wednesday. I do just want to remind everyone that those are recorded and published online when we finish those. So if anyone in the public is interested, they can still go listen to that. And for Amendment 3 to the Southern Flounder FMP, the Commission approved the Division of Marine Fisheries recommendations as their preferred management options. So regarding the allocation issue, they approved delaying the allocation of the flounder fishery to reach 50-50 parity via a stepwise process by 2 years. And so the first year of the stepwise process was shifted from 2021 to 2023, with parity being reached in 2026. In addition, they approved a resolution that the MFC recognizes that there may need to be a consideration of a moratorium if there are continued excesses in the allowable catch of flounder in both the recreational and commercial sectors. They also they gave final approval for the Amendment 2 of the Shrimp Fishery Management Plan, and the division is now moving forward with the implementation of those management measures. In May, the Commission is going to get an information update on the North Carolina FMP for interjurisdictional fisheries, and they will also be hearing the striped mullet FMP, or excuse me, the striped mullet stock assessment outcome at the May meeting. And we're actually not going to have a rule package in May, which is rare for us. We will have rule packages coming in August. So I'm pretty excited about that. All right, and that's it, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Laura. Anything else to come before the advisory committee?
It would go a lot faster if everybody was in person.
It could.
If we'd have known you'd have been there, then I would have come and spent the night at the beach house. But instead, my son is there for spring break, so I thought I'd stay away.
Wise man. Anything else?
Madam Chair, this is Laura Klavansky again. If I could just make one comment relative to Thomas Newman's comment. So we are going to be polling the AC again to discuss whether we're going to be doing hybrid meetings or perhaps traveling for meetings. So if the AC could just be thinking about their preference for that, and feel free to contact me before, but certainly once you receive that email, if you could just let us know your preferences and what your thoughts are on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. We're not doing roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
I'm out of here.
Good night. Thank you all.
Good night. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.